Gareth, you're not on mute. Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, piki mai, haere mai ki tēnei hui. Welcome everyone, and thank you for tuning in this evening to our panel discussion on the Green Party's Thriving Oceans Plan, which we launched last Sunday. Really pleased tonight to be joined by Gareth Hughes, our fisheries spokesperson, Elizabeth Kerekere, our candidate for Ikaroa Rāwhiti, and Steve Abel, our candidate for for New Lynn. So the Thriving Oceans Plan is all about ensuring that we have a healthy moana. In the Green Party, we think it's the most bold and transformative plan that any political party has come out with for our oceans in decades. And we're prioritising it as our nature policy because we should have a moana that is teeming with life. Lots of seabirds, not thousands of seabirds being caught in fishing nets every year. Healthy marine mammals and abundant fish, both for recreational fishers, for a sustainable commercial fishing industry, and as prey for other species. So the Green Party Oceans Plan is about some key points to ensure that we do have healthy oceans. When I got involved in conservation, I was involved in seeking to protect a small part of Aotearoa Harbour as a marine reserve. That took 12 long years, a lot of hard work and a lot of opposition, particularly from our recreational fishers. We have that small marine reserve now, and we also have a taipore in Aotearoa Harbour. But a key part of our Thriving Oceans Plan is taking the recommendations of scientists and protecting 30% of our marine environment. New Zealand Aotearoa seas are 15 times the size of our land mass, yet we have less than 0.5% of them protected from fishing. So we want to ensure that there are marine protected areas in our exclusive economic zone as well as close to the coast. That would all be done, new legislation developed within the framework of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and Elizabeth will talk a bit more about that shortly. Another key part of the plan is a total review of the quota management system. When it started out 30 years ago, it was acclaimed internationally, but now it's seen to have failed. Too many fish stocks are being fished down to a level that is way below their natural population. We can review the quota system, recognising particularly the rights under the Maori fisheries legislation, the Treaty, the Sea Lord Settlement, recognising commercial quota rights, but also changing the system so that we actually have much more sustainable fisheries into the long term. Other policies too, a moratorium on seabed mining for 10 years, phasing out highly damaging bottom impact methods like bottom trawling, and Steve Abel will speak a bit more to that later. But I'd like to turn now to one of our first panellists, Gareth Hughes, who's been our fisheries spokesman for some time and has had a long history in oceans activism. Kia ora koutou, Gareth, welcome. You've been involved long before you became an MP in oceans activism. What does the sea mean to you, and what do you think are some of the key parts of this policy?
Yeah, kia ora Eugenie, and kia ora everyone, and mihi nui kia koutou, kia ora. Look, I think like many Kiwis, right, I've got my favourite beach, the Puawa campsite, just north of Gisborne, where my family used to camp every single summer, I think for the first 18 years of my life. I love to scuba dive. I love to kayak. In fact, retiring from Parliament, I've just moved to this beautiful island, Aotearoa, in the middle of the Otago Harbour, in part so I can be surrounded by the water and closer to nature. I had a kayak around the island today, and actually we saw a seal swimming around, so that was absolutely lovely. Protecting the ocean's been a big part of my professional career, both at Greenpeace and in Parliament. You know, I'm really proud after seeing all that oil that washed up on the beach after the Rena oil spill, making a commitment to myself that we were going to stop oil drilling and exploration as well for climate change reasons. So getting that offshore oil and gas exploration ban was absolutely massive. I persuaded the previous national government to take the case to the International Court of Justice to protest Japan's illegal whaling, which was ultimately successful in the International Court of Law, and then banning shark finning. So it's been something I've been really passionate about. And with this oceans package, you know, I think we're setting out a really bold agenda that's comprehensive. Three quick areas I want to touch on is around cameras on fishing boats, marine reserves and seabed mining. So when it comes to cameras on fishing boats, we know they work. International research is very clear that they are an effective monitoring tool. When we've tested it in New Zealand in the Hauraki Gulf, when there was a trial of 345 boats, seabird mortality declarations actually doubled. So we know that they work. They actually help keep fishers honest. However, to be honest, I've been a bit disappointed with the pace of the rollout under the current government. I think you can see the impact of New Zealand First slowing it down. But at a time of COVID, when we do want to see Kiwis in work, what we've been pushing very clearly to the minister, to the government, is that we should be speeding up the rollout. And in fact, any Crown support to fishers should be linked with faster adoption. That's a bit of a win-win, right? We get cameras on boats faster, we get Kiwis in work faster, installing the cameras, and it's a great win. When it comes to marine reserves, we also know they help increase the abundance of fisheries around them. You talked about Aotearoa, Eugenie. I remember when Nick Smith, I think it was, actually declined that reserve, and then the so-called blue-greens went for a pleasure cruise on the Aotearoa harbour. I was actually scuba diving underwater, holding up a big sign, challenging them. So when the National Party left office, we only had 0.41% of New Zealand's waters protected in marine reserves. That's less than half of 1%. So that's why, this target of 30% is massive. The Kermadex alone would get us to 15%. So it's definitely doable. And acknowledge your work, Eugenie, particularly where I live now, Otago, encouraging marine reserves there. And lastly, with seabed mining, the oceans face a number of threats from ocean acidification, plastics, oil and gas exploration. But seabed mining is one of these new threats, which we don't know much about. We've seen some companies very keen to dig up our seafloor. But I found myself in a slightly weird position as someone who's campaigned and taken direct action on the high seas against deep sea bottom trawlers to work with them actually to try and successfully campaign to stop seabed mining. So a number of groups from Kiwis Against Seabed Mining to iwi, Aotearoa Nui, have been incredible campaigners for 10 years now, successfully winning it in the EPA and the courts. However, these companies with a huge amount of international money trying to grind them down by constantly apply. So that's why I think it's really important we do have a moratorium. There may be a place for it in some places in the future, but we just don't have enough scientific evidence. So that's why a moratorium, I think, provides certainty to those companies, but most importantly to those Kiwis battling on our coasts to protect our moana. So there's a bit of a flavour, like most Kiwis, I love our ocean. I want to protect it, want to see thriving fisheries in the future. It's going to take cameras on boats. It's going to take more marine reserves and protecting our ocean from threats like seabed mining. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, thanks Gareth. Now really pleased to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Kerekere, beaming in from Tairāwhiti, Gisborne. Kia ora, Elizabeth. The Oceans Policy is framed about a partnership with iwi and hapu, recognising kaitiakitanga within the treaty framework. Do you want to talk a wee bit more about that?
Kia ora, thank you, and ngā mihi aroha kia koutou katoa who are hanging out there watching us right now and later. I wanted to tell you first a story about, we call it the whakapapa of fishing. My father, Bison, was raised by his grandfather, who was born in 1898. So that's taken us 122 years back into the past. And I used to go fishing with my father when I was a child. And he would take me, before we sat down, he would take me down to the end and he would say, this is where he used to fish with his grandfather, his father. But that's all built out now by the port. And then he would go further along, and this is where, and at that time, when he would fish, he would be able to feed heaps of our whānau through doing that. And all of our resources were plentiful, and we could have that strong relationship with our moana and our awa. And then he would take me and he would point out where he fished when he was a young man and enough to feed our family when we were just little. And that's all covered in logs where that no one can access that. And then we'd go down and we would sit. And I remember where we used to sit when I was young, that's all gone as well. That's all being built out. And so when I went there, he passed away 15 years ago, but we'd always kind of just come and we'd send, always silent while we're doing it. It's a very communing type of process, but we would sit there and of course, by this stage, lucky if we get one fish. And sometimes they'd smell funny, and sometimes the colour would be wrong on them. And my father had a cast iron stomach, but even he would question maybe about eating some of that stuff because of just all the pollution, everything that was happening, coming down the rivers into the sea. And I mean, just this very year, our iwi Ngāti Oneone discovered in the paper that the few areas where our people could go and sit and fish, they were blocking that off. And we're one of many iwi who have been in environmental court, fighting with our councils, fighting with our local ports to protect the mana of our moana. And I wanted to give some other examples of iwi who are fighting this fight all over the country. And so, Ngāti Roa Nui, fighting against seabed mining. Te Aotearoa Atohe, fighting to protect their toheroa gathering grounds. Ngāti Rehua, Ngāti Waiki Aotea, leading the resistance against toxic sludge dumping in Aotea. Ngāti Porou, Whānau Apanui in the northern iwi, all resisting offshore oil and gas drilling just to protect their moana. And so often, just as we've been finding, local councils, instead of supporting their local iwi and hapu, are often siding with the commercial interests, of course destroying our environment, depleting our fisheries, but going against what we expect to be the real basic obligations set out in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So what our Thriving Oceans Plan ensures is that we recognise the customary and commercial fishing rights of iwi, hapu and whānau. We recognise the moana, the mana moana of iwi and hapu, to approve what happens in their rohe. Our people have the knowledge, have the tikanga to know how to make sure that depleted stocks can regrow. By using those tikanga and those fishing practices of our ancestors, we can look at the health of the whole moana, not just the individual benefit or the commercial benefit of just a few. And so, and when we do those, we're not interested in just consulting with or co-designing with iwi. We want to make sure that when we're working with iwi, they're in charge of their area of what they do and what their expertise is. And for me, one of the pillars that are most important to me is appropriate decision making that says the people most affected have the most say in what happens. In this particular area, it is the absolute minimum that we need to do to bring the absolute best of scientific information, the absolute best of tikanga Māori and mātauranga Māori to bring to bear. Because all of the ocean and everything that belongs is the realm of Tangaroa. Hina moana, she is the ocean herself. She feeds us, she nourishes us, and it's our job to look after her. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Elizabeth. And just in terms of celebrating I think it was the 20th anniversary of Te Tapawai o Rongakako, the Marine Reserve north of Tairāwhiti, and there that was initiated by iwi, and the Marae Whangarā, I think, was able to provide kaimoana for Manahiri as a result of the Marine Reserve because it spilled over into the adjacent area. So one of the major benefits of marine protected areas. Now really pleased to welcome Steve Abel, Green Party candidate for New Lynn, number 11 on the Green Party list. So we need nearly 9% of a party vote for Steve to join us in Parliament. Kia ora, Steve. You've had a long history of activism, like everyone tonight, particularly in the oil and gas area and in the fisheries, bottom trawling, trying to stop that. So just your kōrero about why this Thriving Oceans policy is really important. What is it solving? What are some of the key issues it's addressing?
Kia ora, thank you, Eugenie. And kia ora, Elizabeth and Gareth and everybody watching. Look, I mean, our oceans are such a vast part of the earth and a huge ecological system on which we depend. If we're not taking care of it, we're really doing ourselves a great disservice. And sadly, we've done huge damage to our oceans over the years and continue to do that. I was fortunate enough to be involved in a flotilla which was opposing plutonium shipments through the Tasman in the early 2000s. And those shipments were on their way to a nuclear power plant in Japan called Fukushima, which we had never heard of at the time. But of course, we know what happened to that. And the oceanic pollution from that is ongoing, that Fukushima disaster. In the early 2000s, I was part of a campaign at Greenpeace, led by Dean Bajent Mercer and others, that was highlighting the problem of bottom trawling in New Zealand. And at that time, the New Zealand fishing industry denied that their fishing even touched the bottom of the ocean. And we sent out boats with cameras, and we documented the nets being drawn up from below, filled with huge corals, underwater corals, that was 6 or 7 feet high. And we knew that these were hundreds and hundreds of years old, and that obviously coral only grows on the bottom. It doesn't grow midway up the water. And so we knew that this was proof of the bottom trawling hitting the bottom, which we already knew it was. That led to some protection of our oceans and some seamounts, but sadly, many that weren't heavily trawled anyway were not favoured by the industry. What this policy does, which I'm extremely excited about, and that I know a lot of people in this space have been campaigning for years to deal with bottom trawling, is that it protects all seamounts from being bottom trawled. It puts a ban on that very destructive practice of dragging heavy weighted nets across the bottom of the ocean and basically clear felling and decimating everything. I'm very supportive of that, and I think it's something the Greens should be very proud of. The other space that I'm really interested in is the plastic pollution space. I feel like it's really come to light in recent years, just the vast volume of plastic that is entering our oceanic ecosystem. And it can be likened to a very slow-moving oil spill, if you like, because of course plastic's made from oil and multiples of other chemicals, and it comes in the form of tiny broken up hard pieces of oil, really, that break down over decades and centuries, permeate the ecosystem, cause direct impacts on animals who ingest it or get caught up in it. And then of course it actually enters our food chain, and we end up eating that plastic ourselves if we catch kaimoana or fish that has been affected by this plastic pollution. So the Green Party will get rid of the difficult to recycle plastics. That just stops the stream of plastic that we're producing that can't be really dealt with by any of our waste systems, the number 3, 4, 6, and 7 plastics, and silly things like plastic cutlery and plastic plates and stickers on fruit, you know. And there'll be product stewardship for other plastics. Fishing gear is a major problem for our ocean pollution. It goes on broken pieces of net going catching fish even after there's no fishing boat attached to them. So we're going to have better litter disposal for fishing gear, ghost nets they're called, and there's going to be a container deposit scheme for more readily recyclable plastics like bottles, so that we can stop a large quantity of that going into our ocean ecosystems. And we're investing 10 million a year in beach cleanups to help community cleanups of coastlines of waste and so forth that ends up there. But these are really important steps in the right direction, and I'm particularly happy, as I said again, about the ban on bottom trawling.
Kia ora, Steve. Thanks very much for that, and just for the brief outline of some of the other key policy points. Got a bit of time for discussion now, so welcome to anyone who's just tuned in. And after the discussion, we'll move to answering as many of your questions as we can. So if you'd like to send in a question, please put it in and send it through on the chat. So look forward to, or via the comments actually, look forward to answering some of those. One of the things we haven't talked about really is our plan for the Hauraki Gulf, Te Kapa Moana, Te Mananui a Toi. Because there's been a sea change proposal that very little was done with under the former government. We've picked it up in government, and there's a ministerial committee that's about to make some recommendations. But the green policy goes further than that and is really clear on having spatial planning in the Hauraki Gulf, similar to what was done with the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, so that there are areas that are protected, areas that are other sort of fishing activities would be able to occur in, putting in stronger bag limits on fishing, recreational fishing that apply to the boat, not just single fishers, and ensuring that we also do that within the context of the treaty framework as well, and moving to phase out commercial fishing throughout the whole of the Gulf because of the impact that that has had. We've got a Gulf where crayfish are functionally extinct, where very difficult to catch tarakihi. They're down to about 15% of their natural population. So Steve, you're based in Tamaki Makaurau. What does the Gulf mean to you, and why do you think it's so important that in this policy we have a centred around improving the health of tikapa moana as a priority?
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. I know it's very important to local iwi as well. Ngāti Whātua o Rakai are very concerned about the declining health of the Waitanata, and it should be an absolutely thriving ecosystem out there. It's the perfect climatic system, geographical system in terms of the islands, for us to have an extremely healthy oceans ecology. And so the steps that have been taken here to ensure that that is exactly what is in the Gulf, right on the doorstep of our largest city. We have to take great care to make sure that the negative impacts of a high population, high density area like Auckland are very actively managed. And so I think this reform of the protections in the Gulf is long overdue, and I utterly applaud it.
Kia ora, Steve. Gareth, just in terms of marine protection, you talked a bit about that in your intro. You are a diver. Just in terms of the marine reserves that you've seen, marine protected areas, any thoughts of how they're different from other areas of sea space? And yeah, any comments there?
Yeah, look, I love to scuba dive and get under the water. And I remember when I first scuba dived in Goat Island, which was the country's first marine reserve, lay north of Auckland. It was phenomenal. You had gigantic fish swimming past you. It was a clear abundance. And that's what, the historical record of our coast was once upon a time, before we started sort of industrial hoovering up the oceans. There's a huge difference, and I think fishers know this. That's why they often fish right at the edge of marine reserves, because all the abundant fish are coming out of it. So, look, most people I know are shocked when you tell them that New Zealand, with such a great reputation, has less than 0.5% of its waters protected in marine reserves. We've had some sort of Clayton's protections with what Steve talked about, the bottom trawling, where a whole bunch of areas that they never fished and never intended to fish were closed off, and they sort of wanted a medal or a reward for that. So we need real protections. International evidence shows that if you do protect 30% of your waters, there's massive flow and benefits to the rest of the ecosystem. So it's been wonderful to see the warm welcome that our policies got from groups such as WWF and other marine experts. They work, and we just need to see more of them.
Kia ora, Gareth. Elizabeth, in terms of, at the moment, the Marine Reserves Act goes back to the 1970s, ensuring that there's a strong kaitiakitanga hapu iwi basis for marine protection. Have you got any thoughts on some of the methods that might be used to do that if it was done in a treaty context? I mean, taipure, mataitai, changes to those. Yeah, thoughts? You're on mute, Elizabeth.
Rookie mistake. So mataitai, taipure, rāhui, all traditional ways that our people used to create safety, really, in the ocean. And when I think about it in lots of ways around tapu and noa, and say we understood that we needed to create safety, we needed to have areas that were off limits, that had controls around them. And that's the whole point of tikanga, to make sure that the rules provide for the flourishing of all of our people, and that our connection with the waters, with all of the creatures that our taonga, and especially our taonga fish and marine species who live inside those waters, that was just a normal part of life, and respecting those the tapu of those areas and using those tikanga. I guess I would want to see, and what I think our policy talks about, is strengthening what is there. There are great policies, and there's limited sometimes support for iwi to put things in place. So, and we see that where councils are not backing up their local iwi to use their powers of checking for compliance to back up what is happening there. The other thing, though, I wanted to point out about just in general around the politics of fisheries is we need to resist a narrative that says it's always going to be iwi against the fishers, other fisher folk and other commercial operations. We know that actually a lot of recreational fishers and commercial companies support these kind of methods coming into place because their livelihood is bound up with the flourishing of our oceans. And so it's convenient in lots of ways to say, oh, it's iwi doing things wrong or doing things badly or holding everybody up. But actually, it's only when we all work together and people are able to have given the power, really, to work in the area of expertise. And we do, and we have that. We all work towards, instead of what often happens where we're pitted against each other, or the people causing the most damage somehow seem to have the most say. And we have to reject all of those things.
Sure, Elizabeth. Just in terms of the point you made about the politics of fishing, and I know there's a question that's come in from Glenn Simmons. I suspect the same Glenn Simmons that did that major study at Auckland University that showed that New Zealand was reporting, I think the actual catch in New Zealand waters was more than 2.5 times what we were actually reporting internationally to the Food and Agriculture Organisation. And Glenn asks, given the industry's ability to stymie reform, how will you prevent industry from capturing the Green's Oceans Plan? So just before we answer that, Gareth, have you got any thoughts in terms of the politics of fisheries, which Glenn is alluding to, and then if you had any comments in response to his question?
Yeah, thanks, Eugenie, and Kura, Glenn, thanks for all your work for the country. Look, I think it's been a huge issue for decades in New Zealand. You could say regulatory capture, the role that fishing and lobbying interests have had. Look, I can't speak for the other parties. All I can speak on is the Greens. And, we're a party that has an ethical donations policy. So, we don't take money from fishing companies. And I would challenge the other parties too. This is an area where politicians and government does have a role in the allocative function for, basically who gets to fish where and what. So I think it's entirely appropriate for politicians not to accept money from those with vested interests. And look, I think you can see the impact of what's a very powerful industry on our politics. And I know you'll know that inside and out as well. So we're going to try and lead by example, set a challenge to lay down for those other parties to follow. But I think ultimately we need to improve the structures and institutions so we have a more robust system that's actually making decisions based on evidence, based on the advice of fisheries scientists, not just on who's got the wallet for lobbying and political contacts. So that's why our major reform of the quota management system, I think, is critical. We haven't touched on it a huge amount tonight, but this is a huge deal because the quota management system was world leading, but that was 30 years ago. It's definitely not world leading now. And what we need to take is a more ecosystems approach, a system based on evidence, wrapping up some of those functions. So we think the Ministry of Fisheries will play a big role too, trying to take the politics out. I mean, ultimately, we just want to see thriving oceans. And I think that's in the fishing companies' interests as well. Too often we've seen short-termism get in the way and actually they've acted to their own detriment.
Kia ora, Gareth. Steve, just your sort of analysis of the politics of fisheries and just staying true to the policy that we've set out and what you think might help in that space.
Yeah, I mean, I echo entirely what Gareth says. It makes a big difference if you're not able to be captured by industry. There's no doubt that there's this sort of revolving door situation we have with the regulatory frameworks and the people in the industry, and they tend to be hard-nosed, pushy, demanding kind of characters who run the fishing companies in this country, and they push politics, and they influence people, politicians, in a way that leads to them kind of getting away with blue murder at times, and in terms of our oceans. And most recently, I think this term, the impact that their influence had on the delays in getting cameras on boats, and that was a hard-fought fight, I know, for the Greens. And the impact over the years of us, for example, being one of only 7 nations in the world that still has bottom trawling, and that's because that industry has just pushed and influenced and lobbied at a political level. And I think there's a big structural advantage in the Green Party's approach to politics. We've come from an ethical, environmental advocacy background. Most of the people in the party, or social justice advocacy, or te tiriti advocacy, and tino rangatiratanga. And I think the effect of that is that we know not to be caught out, and it's a complete anathema to us to be captured by an industry interest. We can listen to the experience of fishers. We can understand that it's the same as in the agricultural field. We are sympathetic to the experience of the farmer or the fisher, but we also understand that there are commercial agendas that can very often deny the actual ecological reality. And that's how we've ended up doing so much harm to our deep sea fishery, to our deep water fish, Oreo and orange roughy and hoki. And that's because of an industry that just can't see beyond the next couple of seasons of fishing, and is not looking long term and not thinking ahead and thinking for the future. And as you say, Gareth, if we're doing that, then we are actually making sure that fishers and fishing is still a viable industry for decades to come, as it should be. And our ability to go out, as you described also, Elizabeth, and go to our local fishing spot, and for it to still be abundant because we've looked after our fisheries. And that's what it should be. It should be an abundant source of healthy and safe food and kaimoana for ever, if we look after it properly.
Kia ora, Steve. And yeah, that's certainly in terms of the way in which we're proposing the reform and review of the quota management system. One of the key things is that fishing interests have had to pay for a lot of research, and so they've been disinclined to do that, so that it's meant that there's substantially less research now being done on the ecosystem and fisheries than there was sort of in the 80s. And so we need much more of that natural science research, the ecosystem research, that then becomes a basis for managing fisheries, not just as stocks that you fish down, but in the context of their interactions with seabirds, marine mammals, and other marine life. Some of the questions that are coming in, if we could move now to those, and I think the other answer to Glenn's question in terms of avoiding capture is reform of the agencies. Potentially a marine ministry would be one option that to look at, and just ensuring that if we get a strong party vote for the Greens, it means we're in a much stronger negotiating position at the heart of a new government to put this policy in place. When we've had 3 parties in government, there hasn't always been complete agreement across all those 3 parties of what the priorities are in terms of ensuring that we have thriving oceans. One of the other questions that's come in is, how will we decide where marine reserves would be and how long it would take? I'll have a comment on that and then pass to you, maybe Gareth. So there's been collaborative processes that have been used, like in Southeast Otago, all the stakeholders around the table, strong involvement of mana whenua, and that group coming up with their recommendations. What we need to do to make the process faster, because the Southeast Otago process has taken about 6 years, no fault there, but it's just the system is quite slow, is have scientists identify the areas of high biodiversity value and then make recommendations, and then have a collaborative process about what are the protection mechanisms that should apply. We also, for this policy, need reform of our Marine Reserves Act And that would be a priority for the Greens in the next government as well, so that we've got different forms of marine protection, some where some fishing might be allowed with specific controls, others that are totally no-take marine reserves, and Elizabeth's point about strengthening kaipure, mataitai and rahui mechanisms, making sure that those are all in the marine protected areas legislation as well. Gareth, do you have any comments on the best process for working out how to identify where marine reserves should be?
Yeah, I don't think I could put it better than what you just said, Eugenie, except to say that across my decade in Parliament, I've seen a big sea change in perceptions. Often it was a bit of a clash with rec fishers on one side and conservationists on the other. A lot of recreational fishers and fishing groups actively support marine reserves now. So alongside iwi and hapu, you've actually got a lot of goodwill out there. But one of the barriers you identified is the legislation. It's just out of date. I remember sitting on the select committee a few years ago, and the former one amendment was actually the second longest bill in our country's history, and we're the fourth longest continuous democracy in the planet. It was the second longest bill ever to languish in a select committee. So we just need to modernise that legislation, because people want to get on and get marine reserves and other forms of fisheries protections.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Lovely cat wandering through, Elizabeth. No birds at home at the moment. So a question to you, Elizabeth, whether mana whenua would prefer to be the ones that had responsibility for enforcement of marine protected areas. And I know in terms of taipure, mahinga mataitai, there's the opportunity for kaitiaki. So your thoughts on the responsibilities of mana whenua with new forms of marine protected areas?
I imagine that many of our mana whenua would love that, provided they were sufficiently resourced to do that, and they were backed up by legislation, by strategies and policies that said this is their role to do this. We gave the example of when people at the port were saying, oh, some of our kids were playing up and jumping into the waters at the port where they thought they might cause harm, and they said, oh, we're thinking of getting a security guard. And my cousin, who is head of our hapu, she said, well, how about you bring in a Māori warden and you resource us to come in and talk with the kids, because we know all of them and we know all of the whānau. So it's a simple solution. It takes out that punitive and enforcement, because sometimes you just have to make rules and then deal with people who consistently break them. But others, it's about a relationship with the people who are usually using in our waters. And so, yeah, summary, great if we get the power and the resource to do it.
Sure, Elizabeth, thank you. So another question about saying, why is the proposal in the Thriving Oceans plan for Hauraki Gulf marine areas less an area than was in the sea change document, and why can't areas around Waiheke be included as the local board would like? I think there may have been a misunderstanding of the Thriving Oceans plan. It's certainly not proposing less protection in the Hauraki Gulf than was in sea change. 30% of our EEZ and our inshore coastal area is a lot more, as Gareth noted. It's less than 0.5% that's protected at the moment. So we're proposing 30% across all of New Zealand's marine environment, both the EEZ and inshore. And in the Hauraki Gulf, there were some specific areas being proposed for Ahumoana, about 1 kilometre from the coast, quite extensive areas. That's one of the issues that is being looked at by the advisory group at the moment. But for that to become real, it actually does need a change to legislation, which is why our Thriving Oceans policy, as Gareth noted, does include that commitment to reform the legislation. The proposals around Waiheke, I think, are in the initial stages, but a community process is potentially part of new marine protected areas legislation. Got any more questions? So there's one from Mike Curry, or Mike and Yvonne. What is New Zealand's stance in supporting bottom trawling at a Pacific forum earlier this year? So Gareth, have you got any thoughts on that? Because that was something the Greens couldn't really influence. But yeah, do you want to talk about that? And then Steve, you might have some additional comments.
Yeah, that's very much the case, Eugenie. This is something we weren't consulted on. It was something that the minister did. It looks like there was some involvement from New Zealand First as well. So look, all I can say is that's not something you'd see with a Green minister in that role. And as you remind us so well tonight, Eugenie, if you do want to see people sticking up for our oceans, there with a passion to protect it, you've got to make sure there are Greens around that table. And the way to do that is to party vote Green.
Kia ora, Gareth. So there's another question about, or Steve, did you have any comments on that? Just in terms of the Regional Pacific Forum and some of the work that's done internationally. And part of the policy is supporting a global oceans treaty, which a lot of scientists and others are calling for internationally, because you can't just achieve it in New Zealand waters. So do you want to comment on the international aspects and just the Pacific fisheries and the Global Oceans Treaty? You're on mute.
I know for a start that Jess Desmond of Greenpeace, the Oceans Campaigner, is very happy at the position that we've taken on support of the global marine ocean sanctuaries. It's the same principle on a global scale as what we're proposing here on a local scale in our EEZ and inshore fishery. And that is that those marine protected areas on a global scale are the ways that we can manage the international waters, because essentially we have in our international waters essentially an unmanaged ecosystem where, as nations have destroyed or depleted their own fisheries, they head out to the deep ocean to continue their trade, if you like, in their industry. And so we need global action to protect some of those international waters and deep ocean fisheries, because some of those places, and particularly in the Pacific, areas where, for example, you have the only really functional tuna fishery in the world now, and if we don't protect it, it is likely to go the way of many fisheries around the world, which is to be overfished and depleted and potentially collapse. And so it's exceedingly important that we support those international efforts, because as with all issues in the environment, we're talking about a completely joined up and connected ecosystem, and we need to think about it as a global ecosystem, which of course our oceans are, just like our atmosphere.
Kia ora, Steve. And I guess that another area where those global efforts are really important is seabird conservation. And
Yes.
Hibby and albatross, one of our most threatened albatross. New Zealand this year, with the Greens in government, ensured that we were working with Chile, because the albatross are flying right to the coast of South America to feed. So there's a danger of them being caught on longline hooks and drowned there. And so we really need cooperative action to prevent the seabird bycatch and the impacts that that's having on a lot of our petrels and albatross species. So that's a key part of the policy. The Green Party works in a multilateral way again. So I've got a question from Mike in Coromandel. Greetings, Mike. About here in Coromandel, the mussel farming industry has sequestered significant areas of marine real estate. Everyone welcomes the jobs that are created and the provision of quality food to Aotearoa in the world, but there are some serious negative impacts, including plastic pollution. Are there limits to growth on aquaculture? Great question, Mike. In terms of the plastic ropes that are used, and you can see the fragments often in seabird nests where shags and others have picked up just those plastic fragments and put them as part of their nest. So the comments that Steve was making earlier about that entering the marine food chain, if we have hemp grown more widely in New Zealand, hemp used to be used to make ropes, and potentially those being used on mussel farms so that you've got natural fibres, not plastic. And strong Green Party policy that farmers using marine space would pay a coastal occupation charge. It's in the RMA. It hasn't been properly implemented. We need it to be in the form of a resource rental that's then invested back in sustainable seas. And our spatial planning and commitment to that means identifying areas that are suitable for aquaculture. And this was done through the Environment Court in Golden Bay and Tasman Bay, but then it was overturned by subsequent legislative changes. So that you've got aquaculture management areas where they are identified through a stakeholder process, through a legal process, and aquaculture sticks to those areas rather than just developing in an ad hoc way as happened originally in Marlborough. Does anyone else want to comment on aquaculture, Steve or Gareth or Elizabeth? Okay. So in terms of another question that's come in, Elizabeth, could you describe the involvement of hapu iwi Māori in achieving the aims of the Thriving Oceans Plan? You've already talked a wee bit about that, but are there any other ways in which you think are a priority for hapu and iwi involvement?
When I think about how we put something like this into operation, that there's the kind of the global thing we're talking about being part of an international treaty. Then there's kind of protections we need to put across the country. When I think about iwi and hapu, and there are thousands of them across the country, and I just think that that's a real place where our party could step up with our branches and through our networks to actually be connecting directly with the local iwi, knowing what the issues are and being able to help facilitate for them how this is going to work. Because, I mean, quite often we're not just members of this party, we are involved in the grassroots ourselves doing different things. And so I think it's quite important for us not just to be talking about this as any kind of abstract thing or separate from actually the people in our organisation, in our party, our wider supporters, to playing a part in making this happen. Because I always say change happens in lots of different ways. There's things in legislation, there's things through strategy and policy, but some of it is just going down to your local marae, making sure they know who you are, and getting to know actually what are their priorities and how we can support each other to make these things happen.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think we've got time for one more question. This one's from Jenny. Is there any mechanism to make New Zealand fisheries catch higher value? A lot of low-grade exporters happening. So I think Iceland is an example where their whole fisheries management focused very much on using every single aspect of the fish, so that they were producing high-end handbags from the skin of cod, for example, rather than that being wasted and going to landfill. So I think we've got a big challenge to get the fisheries industry to be innovative and use much more of the fish that is caught within a sustainable system rather than having a lot going to waste. So moving now to just closing comments. In terms of the next steps, Steve, your thoughts on our Thriving Oceans plan and the next steps to implementing that, other than the obvious one of party voting green to ensure that we've got a strong presence in the next parliament, but in the overall area of Thriving Oceans, next steps.
Look, the thing I think that's actually most important about this policy is the principle of working in partnership with iwi to achieve it and to achieve the marine protected areas and work out how we do that. I think one of the real challenges in the space has been a sort of a confusion about thinking we can simply apply a kind of European model of, you know, marine management when we're in a different context here in Aotearoa New Zealand. And so I think that gives me the greatest hope, and I think that's the most exciting framework and starting point for how we can heal our oceans and get them back to a thriving state. And yeah, that's really my main comment, and I think the Green Party is the party to do it. We're in an excellent position to do that, and we understand the importance of that Te Tiriti partnership. And let's get Thriving Oceans, let's get more green members of parliament into this situation and save our environment and our planet, our oceans. Party vote green.
Thanks, Steve. Gareth, some closing thoughts from you.
Well, just thinking about it, when people come visit my island, Aotearoa in the Otago Harbour, we often invite them to do a beach cleanup because, plastic waste washes up. And I think everyone's had an experience of doing something like that. But to solve this problem, we've got to work together, and we just don't need more tinkering. We each need bold, integrated, connective solutions. Something that really struck me last year is there's an American explorer called Victor Vescovo, and he dove to the deepest point ever reached by man, 10,927 meters, the bottom of the Mariana Trench. And what did he find? In the deepest, darkest, most remote place on the earth, a plastic bag. I think about when I was on the Tasman Sea on the Rainbow Warrior, what Steve was talking about. We were stopping the fishermen wreaking their havoc on the seabed, and they, a bit angry with us, and they're throwing fish at us. And we hauled it back in, and some of it was quite interesting to the ecologist on board. But we spent about 15 minutes trying to get this really particularly big fish off in the distance on board. It took about 15 minutes up and down the waves to finally haul it on board. But you know what it was? It was a giant piece of plastic insulation, which these trawlers had ripped off the seabed. So for me, it just shows how we've had such a big impact on the oceans. There was a report by the World Economic Forum and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which predicted on current trends by 2020, there could be more plastic by weight in the oceans than fish by weight in the oceans. But that's if we keep current trends. And I believe we can turn this around and acknowledge your work, Eugenie, particularly those single-use plastic bags. I think 1.1 billion in New Zealand alone have been avoided from going into the environment. So working together, we can solve these problems, but it is going to take big, bold thinking, the type of values, the type of passion that the Greens bring. So the way to achieve it is to party vote Green.
Thanks, Gareth. Elizabeth, your closing thoughts on this.
Want to tell you a story about, there's a crayfish, a coda fishery underneath our port, and it has been studied by many scientists because people can't understand how it continues to thrive in the midst of everything else that's going around it. And it feeds the crayfish right around the whole coast all the way to the Bay of Plenty. And despite its absolute rarity and the hard job that it does, the port still wants to extend and thinks that it can move it as an entity and put it somewhere else and it will live. Of course, that's ridiculous. But what it speaks to is the resilience of our fisheries, of our actual taonga themselves. They are fighting for their lives, and they are still hanging in there. But they really need us to step up. And so our oceans, this plan, I think, is an awesome thing that will help actually show that we care, that we not just care because lots of us care, but it's practical, real things that will make a real difference under a shared vision. And I think we have to also think how, as a party, definitely party voting Green, getting more people in. We have got to have Steve Abel in Parliament, by which time Tiano and I and already and Ricardo will be in. But what are other actions we can do? Let's get down there and be supporting our iwi when they're protesting and sitting down arguing with council. Let's do some sit-ins and whatever it is, any kind of protest, to think about other ways that we can support this plan at a ground level with the people that we live beside in the oceans that we enjoy as much as we can. But kia ora everyone for being here. We'll catch up soon.
Kia ora, Elizabeth. So thank you all for listening and tuning in. There's a lot more information about the Thriving Oceans Plan and the whole detail of it on the Greens website. Would really encourage you to sign on to the petition that is in the Facebook comments. And just from me, this is our best effort with the Thriving Oceans Plan to take on board the views of recreational fishers really concerned about the declining abundance, iwi and hapu really wanting more influence in terms of how our fisheries, our marine environment is managed, responding to that need that we all want healthy oceans that are abundant with fish, where our mokopuna can go down and see thousands of seabirds in the sky, those big just across the whole sky that we used to have, that people can go and put out a line and go fishing and catch something. that we can see orca, as we occasionally see in Whanganui-a-Tara in the Hauraki Gulf, coming in to feed on stingrays, which are abundant, that we can go and see marine protected areas in all of their natural abundance without fishing, and that we work to really change the quota system, recognising that we want sustainable fisheries for commercial fishers for future generations, that we provide some funding to enable particularly those smaller inshore fishers who are often only leasing quota to be able to transition to more sustainable methods. We all in Aotearoa, when so many of us live so close to the coast, have a real stake in healthy oceans, and we need a strong Green presence in the next Parliament to be able to negotiate to achieve that and to reform fisheries management. So thank you for your interest in our democracy, for tuning in tonight. Please sign the petition that's in the Facebook comments. And I'll just end with a whakatauki. E hara takutoa, I toa takitahi, enare he toa takatini ke. My strength does not come from me alone, but from the many. And that's what we're seeking to embrace in this policy and plan. Ka kite anō. Kia ora.